Well, good evening and welcome everyone to the Nyingma Institute's Sunday evening Dharma talk. I'm Donna Morton. I'm a student here as well as a longtime Kum Nye instructor. The title of tonight's talk is Beyond Relaxation, the Deeper Promise of Kum Nye Tibetan Yoga. And there may be some of you unfamiliar with Kum Nye, so in brief, it's a unique healing practice that works with stillness, gentle movement, breathing, and self-massage. And Therdten Tulku Rinpoche, who was the founder here and wrote the Kum Nye texts, he developed this modern form of Kum Nye here at the Nyingma Institute in the 1970s. Drawing on his vast knowledge of Tibetan healing and contemplative traditions. But he adapted the practice specifically for Western students in response to some of the stresses and difficulties with meditation that he encountered in the West. Many people, in fact, probably most people come to Kum Nye because they want to learn to relax. We may be stressed, our body's tense, our mind's busy, and we may be looking for healing or simply a way to bring more ease into our lives. And Kum Nye can certainly offer these things, but when Therdten Tulku speaks about relaxation, he means something much larger. So in his second Kum Nye text called The Joy of Being, he writes, the three pillars of spiritual practice are relaxation, meditation, and concentration. Each pillar has skillful methods for transforming the quality of our lives, energizing body and mind, dissolving obstacles to understanding, and awakening the full capacities of human being. And then he describes the range of possibilities within Kum Nye itself. He writes, Kum Nye can be practiced as a way to relieve tension and agitation. It can be used to sharpen sensory perceptions and bring more beauty and joy into our lives. It can be used to calm body and mind and ease us gently into meditation. And it can become a gateway to sublime states of bliss. So that's quite a range. So although I've titled this talk Beyond Relaxation, I don't mean that relaxation is something we eventually leave behind for something deeper. Perhaps what we need to go beyond is our limited understanding of what relaxation can be. One of the remarkable things about Kum Nye Tibetan Yoga, so this is Rinpoche's first text, is where it begins. In the opening chapter, which is titled The Inner and Outer Massage of Feeling, Rinpoche begins by saying that all of us have memories of times when we felt particularly alive, when the world seemed fresh and promising, body healthy and energetic, our minds clear, and the senses vivid. Perhaps we were someplace extraordinarily beautiful or with a beloved person. Perhaps there was a sense of spaciousness and openness, and the usual boundary between ourselves and the world seemed a little bit more fluid. Rinpoche identifies the essence of these moments as balance. It says relaxation is actually balance. So let's take a few moments to begin there ourselves. Okay. So however you're ranged, sit comfortably. Next, for this little practice, close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. And take a few moments to bring to mind a time when you felt particularly alive. It doesn't need to have been dramatic. Perhaps you were outdoors, perhaps with someone you love, listening to music, or simply an unexpected moment when everything seemed right. Don't work very hard at remembering the story. Just let it come. And notice, how did it feel? In this moment in time, what was happening in the body? The quality of mind. And what about the senses? Let the memory go, but can the feeling continue? This is an interesting place for a system of practice to begin. It's not saying, here is something you don't yet have, but he's saying, you already know this. Perhaps only in glimpses, but the recognition is there. After describing that extraordinary range of Kum Nye, from relieving tension to sublime states of bliss, Rinpoche says something else in The Joy of Being. He writes, the foundation for receiving all these benefits is our own embodiment. Our physical systems known as nadi, and our vital energies, or vayu, beginning with the breath. The foundation is our own embodiment. That's important. The body isn't simply where we start, because beginners need something concrete. Embodiment remains the ground of practice. And Kum Nye exercises work directly with that embodiment. External forms are very simple: stillness, breathing, self-massage, movement. But Rinpoche tells us that the internal exercise, or massage, the essence of Kum Nye, is with feeling. So the external exercise gives us a way in, but the internal exercise is with feeling. And this helps us understand why apparently simple practices can continue to deepen. And this doesn't mean that there are no differences between beginning and more advanced exercises in Kum Nye. As the text progresses, some exercises become more complex, and the feelings they stimulate may become increasingly subtle. Greater sensitivity and cultivation may be needed to fully experience what they make available. But the internal exercise remains the same. The essence of Kum Nye is with feeling. With practice, body, breath, and mind settle. We can remain longer in stillness and with feeling. We give experience time. And as we repeat familiar exercises, we can free our attention from the external form so we can really enter the practice more fully. In a few moments, we'll get up and do a little practice together. So even very simple exercises and instructions can continue to reveal something new. They may be accessible the first time we encounter them and still have unexplored depths decades later. I've been doing Kum Nye for almost 30 years now, and rereading the book never gets tiring. It's always a source of inspiration. And it's uncanny how Rinpoche writes to many levels at once. So you can be a beginner and really derive a lot from first reading, and 30 years later, it's still revealing its depths. So an instruction as simple as feel or become intimate with feeling or expand feeling, these are things we do in Kum Nye. We can start right away, but do you ever finish? No. Let's take a moment to come to our feet. So feel your feet, feel the support of the ground. Feel your whole body, let your breath be easy. With Kum Nye, there's not a particular experience that we're looking for. We just want to get curious about what our experience actually is in this moment. So with the arms relaxed by your sides, just very slowly start to raise your arms in front of you. Moving so slowly so we can feel more. It's like we can feel the movement from within. Let the breath just flow naturally. As the arms rise up, of course, no need to strain if you don't comfortable rising or raising your arms fully overhead, modify it. But if you're okay, bring the arms up. Maybe even stretch hands up to the ceiling, feeling that whole length of your body. And let the shoulders settle. The arms start to drift down. Once your arms are down, let your arms fully relax. And just get curious, what continues when the movement stops? May not be strong, it may be subtle, maybe a sense of tingling or warmth flowing. It's pretty warm in this room. There may be other sensations as well. And with that sense of sensation in mind, let that guide the movement upwards one more time. Just raise your arms to a comfortable place, or if you're okay, let your arms come fully overhead once again. Yay, we have this notion, the slower you go, the more you feel. Stretch it up. And let it settle. And this time, let's turn our palms outward and let the arms drift down out to our sides. Again, just feel what continues. And take your time. Let's come back to our seats and we'll just sit quietly for a minute. To comfortable sitting posture. Just continue to feel. Turn your senses inward. Notice the breath is a little more settled. Our ordinary of understanding of relaxation is often subtractive. Less tension, less stress, less agitation, less effort. These are real benefits. But Kum Nye asks us to notice something else. When some of our habitual contraction begins to soften, we become able to feel more. So relaxation isn't just about what goes away, it's also about what becomes available. So in another chapter in the text called Preparation, Rinpoche tells us to become intimate with our feelings without trying immediately to name or label them. That word intimate is worth noticing. To become intimate with experience, we have to come close enough to feel it and remain long enough for it to disclose something of itself. Usually we interfere very quickly. Something pleasant arises, we want more. Something unpleasant arises, we want it gone. And with most things, neutral, we just lose interest. But the practice of Kum Nye keeps inviting us back to our experience. And feeling doesn't have to be pleasant, to be workable. Feel the whole range. And it doesn't have to be interesting or strong. We do need that curiosity or that interest to stay with it. That's the thing. Can we stay with it? And that's changed the way I think about relaxation. We aren't holding experience quite so tightly or aren't pushing it away quite so quickly. There's just more room. And when there's more room, feeling can begin to unfold. That's part of that transformative power of Kum Nye. It's if willing to stay with it. Relaxation gives us that room, that capacity to let things unfold. Those habitual patterns of tension and reactivity start to soften, become more fluid, and suddenly we find that we're no longer in that same kind of pattern. So this brings us to an image that I'd like to share that appears very early in the text. So let's see if I can make this work. Share. I don't see my screen. Well, perhaps I should have tried this beforehand. Because I have it on the screen, but I don't see it here. Anyway, we move on. I'll just describe it. So for those in the room, I'll just kind of point it out here. So this shows up at the front of the book without really any explanation. Throughout this text, there's just beautiful 1970s style line drawings done by one of the artists that she's still working with Rinpoche even here in his 90s. But you recommend, they kind of have a flavor of Tibetan tankas. In fact, she's a tanka painter. But this frontispiece really doesn't get much attention. So you see two hands in the meditation mudra at the base here. You see this kind of current of energy that is unfolding up through the base and unfurling. And then in the center, these balls, right? We can decode this in various ways. We can talk about the senses and such. But what he writes here is that body, mind, and senses join through a process of inner alchemy. He doesn't give us a formal explanation, and we could come up based on traditional symbols with idea of what that diagram means, but I don't think we need to decode it. I think we can just ask a simpler question. What would it actually mean for body, mind, and senses to join? So you might agree that ordinarily our experience can be quite fragmented. Body is here, the mind is kind of somewhere else, right? And the senses are often being pulled outward towards one thing or another, kind of whatever the object of interest at the moment. And as, these primary elements of our being are in different places, we're often not feeling. So feeling may barely register before we're on to the next experience. So Kum Nye works with very simple gateways into this fragmentation, working with body, working with breath and mind. And as relaxation deepens, body, breath, and mind begin to come into greater integration through feeling. So our bodies, we know, have a feeling element. We even know our thoughts, which are considered a sense, create a feeling experience in the body. And certainly everything from vision and taste and sound all have an impact on that feeling landscape. And it's like feeling is the medium in which they all meet. So actually cultivating the feeling experience is one way to really bring body, breath, and mind and the senses and even more into integration. So, and it's non-conceptual. So we don't do it through thinking. We stay with more the direct experience of body, breath, and senses. So Rinpoche writes in the inner and outer massage of feeling that the key to our internal integration and balanced relationship with the world lies within our feelings and sensations. Through relaxation, feelings awaken, expand, and accumulate until we gradually become aware of a deeper, interpenetrating field of energy within the body and beyond it. So I've noticed how far we've already traveled from our normal, kind of ordinary idea of relaxation. Relaxation opens into feeling. Feeling can deepen and expand. And through feeling, body, mind, and senses become increasingly integrated. So this is the inner alchemy the Rinpoche places at the front of the book. Inner alchemy is really speaking towards transformation. So I think this would be a good time to do another practice. So what we did initially was just kind of a free form. Let's get up into a particular Kum Nye practice. And what's important to recognize is that the outer form of the exercise is not nearly as important as the internal experience of feeling. So unlike perhaps other forms of yoga, I mean, if you can't perform something, even visualizing it will stimulate the feeling experience. So modify away. You can even sit things out if you want to lie down and just imagine. That's also very good. So we're going to just keep it simple, kind of similar to what we've just done, but we'll make it an actual Kum Nye practice. It's called healing body and mind. And we're going to bring arms up overhead once again. If that, for any reason, is uncomfortable, you can do the side bending with the arms just at your sides. So once again, let's let arms float up. Relax your lower body, bending ankles and knees and hips. Relaxed, belly soft. Arms close to your ears. And let's bow to one side. And let your hips shift gently to the opposite side so you stay balanced. And just let it be a graceful arc. No need to strain. And then, let's say on an inhale, let's ease our way back up. And let's move through to the opposite side. So just a gentle arc. Feel the lengthening of the side body. Ease your way back up. And this time, let's do it one more sequence, but let's do it in conjunction with the breath. So exhaling, side, your time. Inhaling, back up to center. Exhaling, the opposite side. Inhaling back up. And then let the arms drift down. And let's do one lower body practice just to kind of bring that lower body in. It's warm here, so we're not going to do too much. So I'm just shifting off to the side so you can see me. So your stance a little wider. Be sensitive if your knees are challenged. Bring hands to your thighs, thumbs pointing inward. Torso is upright. And then just softly bend the knees, letting the knees travel over the toes, over the feet. And then come up and down a little bit. So as you do this, it's not important to move very deep. If your knees are sensitive, see if you can find a place where energy is a little stronger, maybe even a little shaking may be possible. Let's just stay here if you can for 15 seconds. The breath flow, your belly be soft. A few more moments. Then very slowly start to straighten your knees. Let your feet walk in. And relax your arms. Instruction is very simple. Just notice, feel your experience. Maybe it's what feels different from when we started. Just a little more presence. And see if you can kind of stay with that, with your attention within as you come back to your seat. When we practice Kum Nye, we give sitting extended time after each practice, because that's so you could say that the movement stimulates kind of feeling, and each different exercise stimulates the body or embodiment, you could say, in a little bit different way, just as every posture is a different gesture. And then sitting is when the integration happens. Sitting, as we focus on feeling in the body, can start to unfold. And so when we first starting with Kum Nye, we keep the sitting times pretty short, because people are not accustomed to being still for very long or attending inwards. But then as people spend more time in practice, then they feel, sitting starts to be a little bit longer in duration. So let us switch gears a little bit and just mention a wonderful interview with Tartung Rinpoche that was done way back in 1984 in Gesar magazine. And that was a publication of this Nyingma organization. I don't think it's been actively published for quite some time, but it was very active, especially in the 70s and 80s. And this particular interview is called The Practice of Kum Nye. And the interviewer asked whether Kum Nye is a self-contained spiritual path or more a preparation for traditional spiritual disciplines. And Rinpoche says he doesn't think there's too much difference. He describes then spiritual, quote unquote, as a way of being that is healthy and balanced. So I find that important. We don't have to make Kum Nye into something other than what it is in order to discover its spiritual dimension. We don't have to add something esoteric. I mean, the roots of Kum Nye, where it comes from, there is some esoteric roots, but Rinpoche has taken those roots and created something that's accessible to everybody. You don't need, initiations or certain commitments or ceremonies of sorts. It's something that everybody can benefit from. So the big question is, how deeply can we enter within our own experience? In that same interview, Rinpoche describes consciousness, perception, senses, breathing, and underlying body energy, so kind of our subtle body energy, is interconnected. He says that the task for the mind is not to become caught in dichotomies. Am I doing right? Am I doing wrong? But that the mind instead can go into feelings and explore deeper, more significant levels. So now we can return to kind of where we started in this talk. The 3 pillars of spiritual practice are relaxation, meditation, and concentration. And perhaps we hear that a little bit differently now. So what might concentration be when it grows from relaxation rather than tightening? What becomes possible in meditation when we can remain with our experience without immediately grasping, rejecting, turning away? That's one of the reasons Kum Nye, Rinpoche saw when he came to the United States in 1969 and 1970, settled here in Berkeley, time of the human potential movement. There were a lot of people interested in his teaching. So they gathered around him and he started teaching in very traditional ways, which requires a lot of sitting meditation. And he realized they were too restless. They couldn't sit for long periods of time. And so that's when he started taking, his father was a lama and a Tibetan physician back in Tibet. He had Rinpoche's vast amounts of knowledge about Tibetan medicine and extraordinary training from many great masters in Tibet. In fact, he's one of the last remaining lamas, or still living lamas, who was traditionally trained in Tibet. He's in October, he'll be 91. So, in this interview, he said, when the senses relax, the mind relaxes. So relaxation is not simply something that prepares us to do real spiritual practice. It itself is one of the pillars. And its foundation is our embodiment. It's body, breath, feeling, senses, the very territory with which Kum Nye begins. And the movement doesn't end with ourselves. In the Gesar interview, Rinpoche is asked whether self-healing might be selfish when there are so many problems in the world. Right? That question could be asked at just any era. It seems quite appropriate now. And his response is wonderfully direct. He says, self-healing is changing the world. He connects taking responsibility for ourselves with our capacity to relate to and affect others. In the text here, Kum Nye Tibetan Yoga, Rinpoche describes a new way of being, one that delights in the integration of body, mind, senses, feelings, and environment. So Kum Nye isn't simply a movement away from the world and into ourselves. As feeling deepens and we become more integrated, we may find ourselves able to participate more fully in life. So I'd like to finish with the ending of that 1984 interview. And we'll finish a little early here since I've moved along. Kum Nye had been taught at the Nyingma Institute for about 10 years at the time of that interview. And the interviewer asked Rinpoche whether he was satisfied with the results or whether Kum Nye might be practiced on a deeper level. And Rinpoche replied, "We are really just beginning to tap the potential of the body and mind. There's a tremendous vastness there, a new frontier to explore." And finally, he writes, "What happens to Kum Nye depends on the individuals who are practicing. How far do they want to go?" So there really is no endpoint. So I want to thank you all for your participation and interest. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain that or let everybody move off into their evening. Yes?
How does Kum Nye Yoga relate, or if it does at all, relate to kind of classic Vedic philosophy, like the various forms of yoga in India? Or is it like a separate? It's like,
You know, there may be some relationship there that I am not able to articulate. So the practices that he's drawing from have been adapted. I mean, so the practices, for example, in this text, you know, he worked with a lot of traditional practices and then kind of selected out, working with his Western students, which ones were safe and appropriate. There's a lot of tantric yoga that is not really safe to do on your own. So he wanted to present something, especially when you get into various kinds of breathing practices and things like that, got to be a little bit selective. So I wish I could answer your question a little bit more specifically, but I can't really respond so well. Thank you for asking. Right, anything else? Yes.
The drop-in classes here on Sundays. What does one expect in a 2-hour class? Is it a lot of sitting and standing and thinking and contemplating, or what's it like?
You know, what's interesting about talking about Kum Nye is an experiential practice. So rarely does one talk about it endlessly for an hour. So you come in, usually the first thing that's established is the sitting posture. Now, for some people, chair sitting, right? Or on the floor. We have a particular posture that's kind of our home base, called the 7 gestures. It's based on the 7-point posture Vairocana. I mean, this is Enigma tradition. This posture goes way back. And it has, I mean, it's not important to practice Kum Nye that you know all of the subtle energy anatomy and such. I mean, it does get into working with energetic centers. But when you come in, typically establish that posture, kind of get settled, body, breath, and mind. And then you move between typically different movement practices. There's practices in sitting, there's practices standing, there's practices lying down on the floor. And typically you do 3 or 9 repetitions of a practice. Everything's done slowly. And I mentioned something about repetition. So the first repetition, you may just be focused on the choreography of the movement. The early practices tend to be pretty simple, like the ones we just did. Others may get quite a bit more complex, but it's harder then to put your mind into feeling when the movement is complex. But the second repetition, by then you know it, you can attend to the breathing, and you can really then start to go into feeling. And let's say you take that practice and you do it each day. Over a couple weeks, you start to discover the depths of what can unfold within, it could be just a very simple practice. So you need slowness, you need repetition, and you need stillness. So the stillness is where that integration happens. Now, ultimately, we're training on the cushion, so to speak, but this can be a way of life, you know? So we can bring that kind of Kum Nye approach into everything we do. But like most things, it helps to kind of formally practice in order to just kind of develop in a way that internal discipline. So you go back and forth between movement and sitting, and it's almost miraculous. It's like, especially with 2 hours, you just go someplace, meaning it may not always feel good. That's not what we're looking for. You know, as we start getting a little deeper and moving from surface to deeper level sensation, we may discover things that feel dense or tight or heavy or whatever, but we learn to create kind of the space to just breathe and remain. And what we realize is nothing is stuck. Everything is open to change and transformation. But since we're operating typically in those same patterns, we have to give the space and time for that to unfold. So I encourage anybody there's a daily practice that is at 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., 7 days a week. And that is run by Santosh Philip and some of the other instructors we've trained. And you can go onto the website. I mean, if if you want to do that every day, it's on a sliding scale. And then I teach, for example, a Wednesday morning class online from 8 to 9 in the morning. There's a Sunday drop-in, that's a 2-hour class. There's a couple different evening classes as well. So yeah, I hope you come join. Cody, who came to Wednesday, yeah. So, and the terms typically run on an 8-week schedule. So,
Are they open for brand new beginners, all of them, or do you, I would say
there's
you need some?
a couple of the evening classes that are advanced Kum Nye. So they may be dealing with, this is kind of the first book, and then Joy of Being goes more specifically into the senses, so working with sound and vision and smell and taste, and then Kum Nye for the mind. So it's a little more subtle. See, the earlier practices tend to generate quite a bit of feeling. So, you can start to connect a little bit with it. But we start working with just the senses and how we're using the senses. It takes a little just more practice to know how to feel the massage of feeling that comes from working with the senses. So that's why it's considered a little bit more advanced. Also, this book does have movement exercises, but they're less the focus.
Are those books available to buy here?
I don't believe we have a bookstore here, but Dharma Publishing would have them. Also, these books have been around for a long time. I'm sure you can find used copies online as well. They're wonderful. Even if you don't do any practice, you just read them, you'll get a lot out of them. So just look for The Joy of Being, and this one, Kum Nye Tibetan Yoga. It was originally titled Kum Nye Relaxation, but in the early aughts, they changed the title thinking it would be all these yoga, people might discover it. But it was originally, yeah.
I guess are there you mentioned like the more advanced practice. Are there sort of layers to the practice? As in, so for example, I've been taking some Tai Chi and Qigong classes, and one of the things I noticed is that there's sort of the movements, and then there can be added in, there's corresponding breathing, and then there's also kind of a corresponding narrative. For example, instead of stretching up, you can be say like push up the sky. Instead of stretching out, you can say push away the mountains. I guess just wondering.
The breathing practices for sure. We tend to start, but we don't use, well, I have to say there is one other book called Kum Nye Dancing. So let's say this is more inward focused, right? What we were working with today in particular. Joy of Being, you think about the senses are the connection between inner and outer, right? So here now you're working with space and the environment and the inside. So we talked about that boundary becoming more fluid. So first we have to learn to establish that inner massage of feeling. Now we can relate to the environment and space. And then Kum Nye dancing is like an expression in space. It's much more kind of outward, but it's built on this foundation. In Kum Nye dancing, each of the postures has a particular, what can I say? Has a phrase that's a kind of an orientation to the posture. That's the only place that we see that in Kum Nye. But really, it's not about so much, we don't want to be thinking, that feeling. We're just moving in direct experience, kind of bypassing our thoughts or judgments or the labels about what we're feeling. And that's not easy. That's a practice for sure. So I think we've reached the 7 o'clock hour, and I thank you so much for your questions and being here and participation. So let's do a Kum Nye closure. So we typically close the class by bringing to mind the benefits of practicing together, from hearing some of the words of Rinpoche, and dedicate these benefits to the welfare of all sentient beings throughout space and time. And we seal this wish with a closing gesture. And how that looks, we bring our arms up and interlock the hands, back of one hand, forehead, and then switch hands. Open the arms in a gesture of generosity. And then bring the hands in. Thank you very much. Thank you to those online.